Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ramsey Library Virtual Brown Bag Series. My name is Gene Hyde. I'm in the awkward position of introducing myself as one of the presenters. I'm head of special collections here, and I'll be joined by Patrick Balls and Kathleen Lawler a little bit later, and they will talk about their research, and I'll let them introduce themselves. I do have one announcement. I'm supposed to be presenting with my colleague, Ashley Whittle, but she regrets to say she can't be here, but she's happy because she's actually going into labor right now, the birth of her first daughter. So congratulations to Ashley.
Yay.
So what we're talking about here are the Housing Authority of the City of Asheville's records that document, among other things, the urban renewal process that occurred in Asheville. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got those records. And some of you are probably familiar with part of the story. In January of 2007, Cindy Weeks, head of Mountain Opportunities, was working with a UNC Asheville intern, Reed Fornoff, and they discovered that in the basement of the old Altamont Hotel were dozens and dozens of boxes that turned out to be the East Riverside Project urban renewal files. The more they looked at these boxes over the course of spring 2007, the more they realized they were very important. And Cindy started working with the city of Asheville, the North Carolina State Archives Office, and special collections here at UNC Asheville to see what could be done to transfer those files over to Asheville. Now, these files were created as part of official work by the city of Asheville, so they are actually fall under the North Carolina Public Records Law. And public records law in North Carolina is governed by retention schedules. We have one at UNC Asheville as a public agency. And the municipal retention schedule, the folks at the state archives were looking pretty closely at that before these records were transferred. And what we realized upon looking at it pretty closely recently is the retention schedule actually called for destruction, quote, destroy 3 years after the completion of project, for I would estimate probably 1/2 to 2/3 of the documents that are currently in this collection. What that means is they were scheduled to be destroyed and they were not. And this is unusual. This is part of what makes this collection different than a lot of other urban renewal collections we've had, is how complete it is and how thorough it is. And this has just been, as Patrick and Kathleen can talk about when they dig into the nuts and bolts of their research, really, really a gift for us trying to understand this process. And in October 2007, the city officially transferred ownership of the Housing Authority files to UNC Asheville Special Collections, along with $10,000 to help process that. So in 2008, through 2010, $10,000 paid for a lot of student labor to do the initial processing of this. And the boxes and folders, archival boxes and folders, are very expensive. And so they did a pretty good run through that. They got most of it processed into boxes and whatnot. And then after I got here in 2013, we did a second wave of processing. And what we did during that wave is some of the stuff had been described, a little bit of archival theory here. We described things at different levels. Within the Housing Authority of City of Asheville, there's something called a series, and that series deals with the entire East Riverside project is a series within that. The East End Valley Street project is a series within that. The East Riverside project at that point in time was described at the series level. That meant that it said East Riverside, 80 some boxes. And we realized that it really needed to be described a little bit better so people would know more of what was in there and be able to locate materials easier. So we took it down to the folder level, which means now that, and folders are how the city working with this individual properties were in individual folders. So we took it down. Students, it took about 5 or 6 students working for another 2 years. We also went through and double checked to make sure there was no information in there that could be damaging, such as social security numbers. Social security numbers were redacted, and any personal financial information that was in there, we also redacted. So by about 2015, 2016, this collection was in pretty good shape in terms of it being accessible. And about that time, one of the things we want to do in special collections is to try to tie this material in with curricula and to have it be things that can be used by faculty, not only for their research, but also bringing it into classes. Patrick Balls and I started talking at that point about the urban renewal materials we had. He was teaching a class and getting ready to teach another class using urban renewal materials. And that's when our collaboration started. So this is a good time to pass the baton to Patrick.
Great. Thank you, Gene. I appreciate that introduction and that framing. That's some of that information I was not aware of, how we got the archives and how lucky we are. I think it's worth repeating that our collection here I can never remember if it's 96.3 or 93.6 linear feet, but it's a lot of documents stacked end to end. We're talking over 90 feet of documents. And if you compare that with other holdings that I've been able to find in the state of North Carolina anyway, the depth and the richness of the record we have of this process in our community is just unparalleled. So as Gene was mentioning, I'll try to do this somewhat chronologically. I could talk for hours about it, but I'll try to keep it to about 5 or 10 minutes and turn it over to Kathleen after that. But just try to go chronologically here. As Gene mentioned, it was in 2017, I believe, fall of 2017 was when I first taught my course on urban renewal. It was a first-year seminar course. And I'm really excited to have today, Elena Graves is present. She's now in graduate school at Virginia Tech, go Hokies, where she's studying sociology, but she was my peer mentor for the class, both times that I taught that class. So I'm really excited that she can join us today. And Elena, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you want to add anything to what I say about the class, just feel free to chime in. So the purpose of that class was really to get students using the archives and learning just some basic principles of archival research while they uncovered some of the stories, trying to humanize what happened in urban renewal. And so the students would go in as pairs. In pairs, they would each be assigned a specific property. So the nature of the holdings we have is that for a lot of these projects, East Riverside, East End Valley Street, Montford, Head of Montford, we have the acquisition documents, which often contain appraisals of the properties, correspondence between the housing authority and the property owners and the residents, if they were not the same. Many of these were rental properties, some were owner occupied. And you see a lot of that. So there's a lot of rich information in that acquisition file, which deals with how the housing authority acquired the property from the property owners, how much money was paid. Sometimes there would be legal proceedings, condemnation and eminent domain being asserted in order to take the property for public use. And then you also have relocation files. So the next step after the property was acquired was to assist. They were federally mandated to assist the folks who were being relocated in finding new housing. Many of the folks ended up living in public housing. A lot of folks, if they had the wherewithal or the means, would stick around town, moving elsewhere in town. But a lot of folks would end up moving out of town where they could better afford to live with family elsewhere in the country. So this resulted in, as it did nationwide, a dispersion, an explosion of the predominantly Black communities that were affected by urban renewal. I don't remember the exact figure, but it's something like 90 or 95% of the folks who were directly impacted and relocated through Asheville's projects were Black. One of the things that I'm hoping to do, I'm going to go ahead and share real quick. I've got a few documents or a few pictures I want to share as we talk here. One of the things I'd like to share is the outcome of the work that students did in that class. Many of you may have seen this was on display in early spring before COVID hit. It was on display in the Ramsey Library. The poster series Missing that the students in the 2019 iteration of my class did. So like the previous class in 2017, these students in fall of 2019 were looking at specific properties, acquisition, relocation files, and they wrote some text. And I'm happy to share this afterward for anyone who would like to see more of these. they wrote text and they paired that text with before and after. So what did the home look like, and what does the property look like now? Of course, the original residence no longer standing in most cases, and in its place there may be a realigned. The property lines may have shifted, and there's a new home on this particular lot. And they tell the story about the folks who were relocated in an attempt to, as I mentioned, to humanize urban renewal. Um, yeah, so there are a few of them. I think, are they all up, Gene? I think, or just some of them are up right now in Ramsey as part of a larger display.
The entire Missing series is up in Ramsey, and also just a
Yeah.
little bit adding to your earlier comment, there's actually 165 linear feet of records.
Oh, wow. Okay. I don't know why I was thinking 90 something. Okay. So way
It's
more
a
than,
staggering amount. Yes.
yeah, a lot. Um, so just to kind of to link from what was going on then to what I'm working on now in the archive. So back when I was teaching those two courses, again, the goal was to look at the very individual level, going into a deep humanization of the folks who were impacted. Right now, what I'm hoping to do with a lot of my research, what I see in the literature, there's a lot of discussion of the federal policy level. So the Housing Act of 1949, the Highway Act of 1956, these big congressional documents that put into place and accelerated the process of urban renewal, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, who laid out all these policies and guidelines. But you don't hear, besides the vaguest description of this high level stuff, these big level congressional acts. When you hear about urban renewal, it generally goes from that level down to, and all these people were impacted. But what's missing is the story in between of how all of those policies and how all of those procedures and processes actually played out. So what I'm trying to do is put together a meaningful narrative that enables us to see the actual processes, how housing and urban development as a formal entity um, provided guidelines, provided policies that individual communities would have to follow, and then in turn how the individual communities implemented those policies and processes. Because I think what often gets lost is that there were actual live human beings doing this work. There were contractors and real estate agents and appraisers and bureaucrats and all the mechanics of each municipality, all the people who are in that governmental bureaucracy over the span of decades doing this work. And what I'm finding, as is the case in a lot of other areas, the role of discretion plays the role that discretion plays. So what the policies say and what they don't say, and that gray area in between where actual live human beings have to implement that policy, there's a lot of power there. And when one chooses to do or chooses not to do something, that can have a huge impact. Regardless of the intent of those persons, it can have a huge and perhaps divergent impact on the community. So that's one of the pieces that I've been working on. And in parallel with that, a few other sort of branches to my research have come out. A lot of it stemming from communication, and there are some folks on this call right now who are working with the Racial Justice Coalition, starting back in, I think it was maybe August or September of last year. I got in touch with some of the folks with RJC who are pushing the city and county to keep their promises. As many of you know, the city and county agencies voted, in the city's case, unanimously to pursue reparations or to explore reparations. And RJC and other organizations are really pressing these civic agencies to stay true to those promises. And urban renewal is very closely tied up with reparations because of the immense loss of wealth to the Black community that urban renewal entailed. And Kathleen will have a lot more to say about that. A lot of the work she's doing is directly related to that. But a couple of the things that have come out for me, paralleling with this sort of, from the top to the bottom, all that policy exploration, is a collection of oral histories, trying to alongside an understanding of the loss of wealth, the numerical perspective, the quantitative perspective, also trying to capture while we can and preserve the stories of the folks who were directly impacted. So putting together a collection of oral histories from folks who themselves experienced urban renewal in Asheville or whose families experienced, and maybe talking to some of the folks who were involved, some of the functionaries and bureaucrats who were actually involved in implementing urban renewal. And the last thing I'll say before like I said, I have a few documents I'd just like to share to give folks a sense as to what is actually in the archives, and then I'll turn it over to Kathleen. The last thing I wanted to say is I'm also looking at other archival collections in the state of North Carolina as available. The two that I'm focusing on right now are at East Carolina University in Greenville and Durham. The Durham County Public Library actually has extensive digitized records of urban renewal in Durham. So those two communities, during much of the same time period as Asheville, had urban renewal projects, and seeing the various similarities and comparing the ways in which the processes were enacted from city to city is really interesting. Let me just, like I said, I just want to share with you all some of the documents, just quick screen share some of the documents that I've been working with. This picture I love. I took this picture yesterday. I posted on Facebook. Some of you are my Facebook friends. You might have seen. This is the special collections copy of the Housing and Urban Development Urban Renewal Manual. It's about a 5-inch thick collection of loose leaf circulars and other policy documents that are kind of updated, and you take them out and you put in its replacement. So it's continually up to date. This copy is mostly from late 60s, early 70s, and it contains pretty much everything you would ever want to know about urban renewal policy. And so I'm using that as sort of a guiding document to help me understand what the policies and procedures were. There are some really interesting. There's also some really interesting records of the community from that time period. This is a photo I took of one of the pamphlets. The Housing Authority, I think it might have still been the Redevelopment Commission at that time. The Redevelopment Commission, which was in charge of urban renewal, put out a publication called the Community Improver. And this is from an edition of the Community Improver that featured testimonials from the Black community in the Southside neighborhood in particular, who were trying to make the case for urban renewal, because essentially what had happened was the federal government supplied some of the funds for the East Riverside project, but not all of them. The city had to raise a good chunk of the cash themselves, and to do that they needed a bond measure. And the bond measure was kind of on the edge. It had some support, but not enough to pass. And so the Community Improver ran this. I think this is just weeks before the first attempt to get the bond measure to pass. They ran this piece, hoping to get, in particular, the Black community behind that bond measure. Interestingly, the bond measure failed in its first attempt to pass, but then in a by-election several months later, they actually got the bond measure to pass. So it looked at first like they wouldn't have enough cash to do the East Riverside project. I'll just do one more. I don't want to take too long here. I want to let Kathleen have a chance to say a few words. Just this gives some ideas to some of the documents that we work with. This is an appraisal from Livingston Street. I've actually been in touch with the great grandson of the owner of this property, and he's reached out to me, interested in helping with the project. I believe he's going to. His great grandmother is no longer with us, but his mother. He's going to interview his mother for the oral history collection. But they live down. This is actually very close. If you know where the Eddington Center is, and you saw a picture of Mr. Eddington, by the way, in that Community Improver document a moment ago. If you know where the Eddington Center is on Livingston, this is about a block west of the Eddington Center. Of course, the building is no longer there, but this residence was home to, at one time, something like 11 or 12 family members, 8 or 9 of them from one generation, 2 or 3 of whom passed away in a fire shortly before the city acquired this property. So there was, after this appraisal was done, there was some fire damage done to the building, and then a reappraisal had to be done to establish a new baseline. So again, all this documents, this gives hopefully some sense as to the richness that's there. All of this is supporting these reparations efforts, oral histories, and all of this work. It's amazing. It's life-changing to get to work with these documents. It really means a lot to me that we have this collection, and being able to pull these stories and save them and share them publicly is really powerful. So I'm going to go ahead and shut up for a little while and turn things over to my colleague.
Thank you, Jean and Patrick, and thank you for inviting me to join you at this brown bag today. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen Lawler. I'm a professor in the economics department here at UNC Asheville, and I am just embarking on, in the early stages of a pretty big research project to try and quantify the value of Black wealth that was lost in Asheville due to urban renewal. Using the archives to do that, and basically converting the archives into a database that will allow us to describe the characteristics of all the homes that were taken. It will also give us a list of all the people that were affected, and also their relocation locations. So we'll really be able to get a very detailed picture of what happened during urban renewal in Asheville. And I thought, maybe I'm not sure if everybody on the call today knows a lot about urban renewal, or what exactly it was. So maybe I'll just back up and just say just a little bit, because I'm sure many of us do know what it is, but just to sort of give some context, so it's beginning in the 1950s and really continuing through the 1980s. And arguably some people would say, it's still going on today. Hundreds of Black neighborhoods across the US were essentially bulldozed to the ground in the name of social and economic improvement. And so the US Department of Housing and Urban Development had deemed all of these neighborhoods to be blighted. And like slums, and they were in need of repair, right? And of course, this was a pretty predictable, I guess you might say, an expected consequence of redlining in the United States, which prevented Black homeowners from, getting loans to make improvements in their home, and prevented the Blacks from getting loans to buy homes, mortgages in these communities. So it was sort of inevitable that there would be this underinvestment in these communities, and there might be some decline. However, I will say, what I'm also really struck by when I go through the archives and looking at the pictures of some of these homes. Mary put a comment in the chat about that, as well as reading the consultant reports and the social surveys that were done with the people in these communities pre-project. I'm really struck by how it seems that, the cause of the blight and the sort of degradation in these neighborhoods was really due to the lack of local public goods in the communities, the lack of investment at the municipality level in things like sewer systems, street lights, sidewalks. And you see, in looking in these, especially the surveys with affected communities, this is what people wanted. And then, you look at the pictures of the home. So the archives have not only these detailed records about every home that was taken during urban renewal, and the appraisal reports that describe all the characteristics of the home, such as square footage, number of bathrooms, bedrooms, age of home, condition of home, and it also includes, photos of the homes. And I look at the photos of these homes and I say, man, that looks like a really cute bungalow in West Asheville that just sold for like $400,000, right? I mean, so a lot of these homes were built in the 1920s, but we see in West Asheville and all around Asheville today, homes of that age, selling quite well in this market. So what I'm trying to do is to consider that and consider what if people had been allowed to stay in their homes and accrue generational wealth and also sell their homes in the contemporary Asheville real estate market, which is hot, right? As we all know, what would people have earned? And that gives us an estimate of what is the value of Black wealth that was lost in Asheville due to urban renewal. And we can estimate that econometrically by conducting what economists call hedonic pricing models, where we use contemporary real estate data just to set using regression analysis to determine what are the how much various characteristics such as square footage, number of bedrooms, age of home, et cetera, and access to amenities like greenways, how do those affect the price of a home? And then we can use that contemporary real estate data to estimate essentially a predictive model. And then we can plug in the characteristics from the old homes that were taken during urban renewal to say, what would have been worth today had they been able to sell them. And so that is the work that I am just starting with a lot of help from Jean and Patrick to orient myself and my students to these like very, very complicated and detailed archival records, so I can convert this into a database and undertake this work. And it's like I said, it's going to be a huge, multi-year project. I'm hoping I can find the time and funding to do it. And I'm hoping to involve a lot of my students. The East Riverside project that was mentioned, it was the largest urban renewal project in the Southeast. It was the first one. There were several urban renewal projects in Asheville, or East Riverside took place started in 1965 and I went to 1988, according to the archives. And, it affected 1,250 households, which was over half of Asheville's Black population at the time. So that was a big project, and that's just one of the 5 or 6 urban renewal projects that happened in Asheville. So there's a lot of records about a lot of homes to go through, a lot of people that were affected. Yeah, maybe I could keep going on. Maybe I'll stop there and see if turn it back over to Jean and Patrick.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. I would like to point out that Patrick and Kathleen, their research is active and ongoing now. There's Kathleen has a student coming in every week. Patrick is coming in on a weekly basis. We're open by appointment only now for COVID restrictions, but they're really digging into the data and getting that information together. Kathleen and I have also talked about the possibility of getting this material digitized, and we've been looking at grants for doing that. Due to the size of this collection, it's hard to really guesstimate how much it is, but it's probably somewhere between 80,000 and 130 or 140,000 pages. A significant digitization project. But we are examining now grants to do that. Some of our colleagues, UNC Charlotte recently got a grant to work with their urban renewal records and digitize them. So there's some precedent out there in the grant agencies. And so we're hoping that we could probably get something going with that maybe next year or so.
I could just say a couple things real quick I put in the chat, but we've got some amazing students working on this. Jean just mentioned Brenna. Emily Cadmus is applying for a McCullough Fellowship to support her work on this. Bella Jackson. Kathleen, I think you might have a couple others worth noting, but as Jean said, this is really just underway. And as Kathleen said, it's going to take some time. I mean, I don't think this is anything that we're going to wrap up anytime in the next few months. I think this is a multi-year project. At least what I'm working on is going to, and Kathleen, I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I think this is a long haul sort of deal. And one thing, Kathleen, you were talking about the cute little West Asheville bungalow is very comparable. It strikes me, part of the data I'm trying to get from other archives, as I mentioned, is similar documents, appraisals, acquisition files, et cetera. It struck me, I started to look at the digital appraisals, the digitized appraisals from Durham. Um, these houses were huge and beautiful, like turn of the century. We're talking, they were 50 years old, so they were like 1910, 19 teens construction. Very often 1,500, 2,000 square foot, 4 bedroom, 2 bathroom. And at the time, brick and frame construction, really solid foundations. They were listed by the appraisers as not being in good shape, but again, they were not kept in good shape, or the shape they could have been kept in had the folks who lived there had access to the funding that was denied them because of redlining. So houses that would be, I don't know Durham real estate as well as I know Asheville real estate, but houses that in Asheville, if they were in the right part of town, would be easily $1 million, $1.5 million, were lost to urban renewal. So when you start thinking about the loss of wealth, as you said, Kathleen, the intergenerational loss is just staggering, absolutely staggering. And that's just the numbers, to say nothing of the community that was lost.
And I'd like to add a little bit more about the student involvement in this project, from the perspective of those who actually were processing it, and from the perspective of watching Patrick's students work with this material. The human stories that are in here, the narratives, the correspondence, the people who are not understanding what's happening to them, the sometimes kindness of bureaucrats, sometimes just cruelty of bureaucrats. Many times I would have students working on this, and you would go back to check on them, or just they'd come to you and they would just be amazed at what they were finding, and coming to me and reading letters that they had, that it's, how did this happen to these people? So just those folks who were going through this again, page by page by page, to make sure there wasn't any private information like social security numbers we need to redact. You could see the students touched by this. And I think this has been consistent with all the students that have worked with this material. And what's real exciting about Patrick and Kathleen's work is they're now going to raise this up where other people can also see what the human dimension of this entire process is.
Yeah, I was just also going to add one thing I forgot to mention is, though, so in part of the process and project of converting the archives essentially into a database, part of our goal is to make this then database public, and this will have, and to create a list of all of the people that were affected by urban renewal in Asheville, which the city doesn't have right now. And so we were in conversation with the city, and the folks at the city said, yeah, we're interested. We would like to see this list of all the people that are affected, and they're supportive of this work. And so we hope that this is going to be useful to the city, to the Racial Justice Coalition that Marie's part of, and to people in the community, so people can look up. And I want to make the database searchable, like easily searchable by like maybe property address and last name, so people can look up and find their family's home, and see what they were compensated, what they were paid in relocation expenses. And so I think that that'll be an important contribution to the community. And, to circle back to what Patrick mentioned, it has a lot of relevance in Asheville, given passage of the reparations resolution, because there's a lot of debate regarding at what sort of level of government should reparations take place, if they are to take place. But this is, at the municipality level, this is something that the HUD financed urban renewal, but it was implemented by the municipalities. So I think that this will have a particular salience for the reparations conversations in Asheville.
And with this database, just to piggyback on what Kathleen's saying in terms of like public facing documents, you were talking about earlier the relocation locations where people were displaced to, we will be able to create like a dispersion map that sort of shows you the diaspora of Asheville after urban renewal. We'll be able to construct story maps where you can, interactively click on a map and click on a property and see, who lived there, what their story was, where they might have gone to. There are so many possibilities for public facing information. I would love at some point, again, this is multi-year, but I would love to team up with the county clerk's office, maybe to connect this with deeds and titles that are also publicly available. I'm in conversation right now with Andrea Clark, who some of you may know as a photographer who captured a lot of beautiful images of the East End neighborhood in the 1970s before urban renewal. I'm working with her to investigate her family's property on what was then Valley Street, and how her family acquired its first parcel of land on Valley Street from the Patton family. So her great grandfather or great great grandfather was a slave, and following the Civil War, was able to move to Asheville and acquire property from the Pattons on Valley Street and begin to establish themselves as part of the Black community there. And a lot of that record I've found through the county clerk's office, just searching the deeds that are digitized and available. And I've transcribed those because 19th century handwriting is hard to read. So it's painstaking to kind of to read through it. So I'm working on transcribing those. And she and I are meeting tomorrow to discuss how this story, her story, but hers is just one of, as Kathleen mentioned, thousands of stories that are in the archives there. So this is history that we need to keep. We need to keep in focus and keep alive.
Kathleen and Patrick's comments about sort of how this had the federal HUD level going on and the local level as well, in terms of the funding, in terms of, these documents that we have here will be interspersed with HUD documents, with city documents together. I have seen some people speculate that the reason we have so many documents here and they weren't addressed and destroyed through the retention schedule for local documents is they weren't sure whether they were federal documents they should keep or whether they were local documents that fell within the retention schedule. Either way, it turned out to be a good thing for the historical record that they were here.
Curious to see if folks have questions at this point. I know we got about 20 minutes left. Anne-Marie?
Yeah, Anne-Marie. I'm a research volunteer coordinator for RJC. And I had a question about Kathleen and maybe Patrick, as far as the areas in which you want to start, especially the archiving and sort of the quantifiable aspect. Are there certain neighborhoods that you're starting with? It sounds like East Riverside is the biggest, so that might be the most, but are you releasing this? I know the intent is having it for public access. Is it being released as you are doing this, or are you waiting for a bunch of ones that you are gonna try to collect first and then release it, or just more of the timeline and process of public access? That's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I have actually not even pondered that, but I'm going to ponder that now. So I'll say I'm starting right now with my student that is working at Jean and Patrick's suggestion. We are starting with the East End Valley Street project, and that's because that's 116 properties. So it's manageable, and so I'm hoping that I can get that can be done by the end of this semester or summer. So probably, and I'll probably want to go over it. So sometime this summer. And yeah, I hadn't thought about, I guess I had sort of envisioned then trying to build in the other, all of the records and then making it public. But you raise a really great question though, about maybe could it be made available public project by project? I think that's a great idea that I should look into more. Yeah, I don't know if, and Jean or Patrick, if you have thoughts on that.
Well, part of the reason that we went with the East End Valley Street is partially that's the one that Patrick had been working with a lot. So we had a lot of collective familiarity with it, but also it's about 20 boxes versus East Riverside, which is over 80. So the scale for doing the first run of this study within this one particular series seemed to be a whole lot more manageable initially. But Kathleen definitely has plans to move on to especially East Riverside.
I like the idea of sort of a staggered release as long as it's clean enough. Like,
Yeah.
we definitely want it to be in order. But yeah, I think we can definitely talk about that. I put in the chat too that East End Valley Street, as those of you, Marie and others who are working with the city might know, there's a really nice city GIS property map. You can go and you can see what lands exactly the city of Asheville still owns. And I wouldn't say the bulk of it is in East End Valley Street, but I think in terms of like percentage of the area or percentage of the project area still owned by the city, East End Valley Street is a really huge percentage. Like a lot of that land is still held by the city. And from the point of view of reparations, for instance, in some sense, city held property is low hanging fruit, right? If the city is going to say, yes, we support reparations, then you've got all this land. There you go. Here's your chance. And so I think that's another good reason to start there. Betsy, thanks for coming. By the way, I should say she just left, but Betsy Stockslager is an awesome teacher at Isaac Dixon who does units on urban renewal with her fourth graders. And she and I were contemplating trying to do something with the 1619 project around urban renewal in Asheville. So.
And I know, Patrick, that you've been involving a lot of community folks as well. And I just wanted to see how, what that process is like, because as RJC is receiving more volunteers, I know there was another neighborhood association that was like really interested in knowing, I was Malvern Hills, I think, a neighborhood association, and understanding like their neighborhood and where they wanted to apply. So I talked to somebody from that neighborhood association and wanted to get your thoughts on engaging other community folks.
Yeah, I think getting the community as involved as I see this as, I don't want this to be faculty led research necessarily, faculty facilitated maybe. I love how, Kathleen's done a wonderful job in involving students, but I think you and others with RJC as community researchers is equally important. And the more folks we can get on board. I talked to, some of you may know our Professor Emeritus Dwight Mullen, who was in our political science department for many, many, many years. Kathleen has been in touch with him about her work. And I talked to him a couple days ago about the work that I'm doing. And he was very, very, urged us very much to continue to reach out to community researchers. This really is something that, for instance, when it comes to oral histories, people will tell their son or their daughter, it's almost like StoryCorps, the StoryCorps model. If you've got a son or a daughter or a cousin or grandson interviewing a family member, they'll say a lot more to that person than they will to random white dude at a university, quite honestly. So involving folks as oral history interviewers is another way that I can see people getting involved.
I should also point out that right now, due to COVID, access to special collections is limited to UNCA faculty, staff, and students. And we are looking forward to being able to open things up to the community again. These are publicly accessible archives. You can come and look in these boxes as a community member. And right now we're getting through the pandemic, but there will be a time when that is over, and I anticipate getting a lot of folks coming in based upon the interest that's ongoing with everything, and we really look forward to that when we can invite the community back in.
I have a question that kind of touches on the same idea. I'm wondering what kind of efforts are being made to release these documents to family members. I understand that there might be some kind of legalese that needs to be navigated, but because these are documents that record personal histories, that record families existing in real time, what is available to be released or to be handed over? I understand that it's public access, but is there some kind of tangible option we can offer for our community members or for our families affected by this legacy?
We could provide copies of anything. These are public records. And like I say, we scoured them to remove social security numbers and things like that. But these are public records. We have, in the past, there have been folks who have come in who have been interested about their properties or their families, and we've provided them with the records from those property files. So before we can get this thing digitized, which will be a large project, we certainly welcome people to contact us. While they're all public records, we do need to hold on to the originals, but everything we can provide copies of anything and everything.
That brings up, something that brings to mind is about the missing posters that I showed that one of earlier. We made the decision when we made those posters to anonymize the residents. We kept the street numbers intact, but we changed the names of the persons because we wanted to avoid, without being able, in many cases, not being able to seek out the family members. We felt it was inappropriate without express permission from the families to spray their names up there on those posters. So we did anonymize the families who were affected for that project.
Are there any other questions from folks?
I see Leah's comment in the chat. Thank you, Leah. That's fantastic. I think age appropriate materials around urban renewal, that's exactly what Betsy's interested in. I think obviously we all know what I think most of us are aware that Asheville City Schools are transitioning back to hybrid in-person and online learning in the next few weeks. So she unfortunately didn't have the bandwidth right now to continue to pursue this project, but I think in the future that's exactly what she's looking to do. So I would love to talk to you about your students and talk to your students and getting them involved.
I have a question, Patrick. And it was like it's all about bandwidth. I really get that. And being unable to find the families of the people who lived in those homes and thereby anonymizing the data, that's a good call. At the same time, this is kind of like how I heard in Anna's question, there's been work done on this family that the family itself does not have. And is there some way that the work can be done to find the family and give them this gift? So it's a big ask.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what I've done in a few cases. There have been a few stories that have come up in the last few months as I've been reading through the archives that I feel are particularly compelling and ones that I wanted to investigate a little more deeply. And so what I've done is using newspapers.com, used obituary searches to find names of next of kin and descendants. And when possible, there have been a couple of cases where I've been able to actually find, in that manner, folks who were related to, descendants of the folks who were directly impacted. It's like you said, bandwidth. It's time consuming to do that with everyone affected. I'm sensing a good way to involve students, perhaps in the future, if this is something that we would like to do.
Yeah, Mary and Anna, that's a great idea as we're searching for resources to bring this project to scale, that we also think about resources to add on that component of the research. It's not just making the database public and saying, hey, everybody, it's up on the World Wide Web, but reaching out to everyone, which will be a pretty big project in itself. And, it also might be something like Jean and Patrick, when we talk, as we move forward and we talk with the city about this, like maybe the city could, this is something they could maybe put some resources to, perhaps, to try to help us do. I have no idea, but I think it's worthwhile that we should try and see, could we not just make it public, but really track down descendants? Actually, Mary, I wanted to ask you a question, follow up with something you put on in the chat. You said there was a study by someone, Rich Matthews, that did a study of properties. Who is he and how can I contact him?
I think the best way to contact him is just to, I'd say look him up in the phone book. Of course, there aren't any phone books anymore. But I'm sure he'll be online. He has been very active in historic preservation in Asheville for decades.
Okay.
And his wife is an architect who also is interested in historic properties. So the Preservation Society perhaps just has his telephone number online, decades of work. I saw Rich's presentation, which he just picked up the work personally because he thought it was important. So it was pre-COVID, maybe 4 years ago, I was at one of the community centers watching a slide presentation by Rich Matthews going, here's the property that was taken, and look at this place, there's nothing wrong with it. And here's another picture, and things are kind of run down on this street, and I can see some problems here, but the house at the back, that looks good. So yeah, he would be, I think, delighted to have someone pay attention to that work that he did a number of years back, and then just on his own, and presented it a couple of times and put it on a box on a shelf.
Yeah, I'd be curious too. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the role that discretion plays. If anyone's familiar with the work of Michelle Alexander regarding criminal justice and the new Jim Crow, she talks a lot about how at every decision point, the discretion that is allowed the arresting officer and the arraignment judge and the sentencing judge, and all this discretion is what really condemns a lot of people to unnecessary incarceration. Much the same, I think, is at play in urban renewal, and the discretion of the appraiser plays a big role here. And one of the things I'm really curious to know more about is appraisal standards. I never thought I'd say that sentence in my life, that I want to know more about appraisal standards, but I think that could play a huge role, because some folks were able to rehabilitate. Notably, when I was talking with Mr. Roy Harris, many of you may know Roy. He's a longtime resident of Asheville. He moved to Asheville after urban renewal, but he knows many people who are directly impacted, and was next door neighbors to the Delaney family, Francine Delaney, who is very famous for being the first Black graduate from UNCA. Francine Delaney's school in West Asheville is named after her. She was an area educator for many years, and her husband Logan Delaney was also a civic leader and a leader in the Black community. I came across their home in the East Riverside Project area, and it was one of those cases where they happened to live in the right place, and they happened to have the wherewithal to rehabilitate their house. As the HUD department would say, they rehabilitated. They had the money to fix what they were told had to be fixed in order for their home not to be acquired. So some folks were allowed to keep their property if they had the wherewithal to fix it up to the standards that were required.
And that's actually a lot of the material that we removed the personal information on was financial data that came with those rehabilitation loans. There was financial data back then, Social Security numbers were used. So a lot of the redaction occurred in the loan files, the rehabilitation loan files. That brings us up to about 1 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for coming, and thank Kathleen and Patrick for agreeing to participate. Should note that Patrick and I will be doing a version of this at the Appalachian Studies Conference virtually in a couple of weeks. So part of this will be rehashed later. But thank everybody.
Thanks for coming, folks.
Hey, thanks. That was great, folks. Kathleen, one quick question. When you talked about the database, do you have an idea of what database you're going to use?
Oh, like what sort of like
What
software
yeah.
operating system? I mean, just for I mean, in this in terms of once it comes time to make it public, no, I need to get in touch with somebody that can help me figure out like how to make it like really user friendly to interact with it and search it. I mean, right now we're just putting it together in a Excel file, and we're going to analyze it in Stata. But yeah, and then when I get to that point of making it publicly available, I need to reach out to more like database IT sort of experts that can help me
Yeah, and
find something
there's
with a good
plenty
user
more than
interface.
me. There's plenty more of those than me. I just started playing with Airtables because of it's a relational database, so you can link those different files. So if you have a file of, like owners, and then you have a file of property, you can easily link them. But then you can also create different views. So again, it might be something to look into. And
Airtable.
I've just started playing with it myself, and I'm pretty impressed with it. But I would love to just follow you guys. I wish we had a Facebook page or something on the progress in this, because again, getting it out to the community through Leadership Asheville will be great. And maybe it's something we do for a Buzz breakfast this summer. Is have you guys as a panel and come in and just present what you got so far, if you don't mind. That'd be huge. Because we do get a lot of people from the community who would love to hear this and know this as well.
I'd be game. I do have a sandbox kind of website that's not at all public facing right now that UNCA, the IT folks and the distance learning folks at UNCA made for me, that I'm just playing around with, starting to put some rudimentary maps up, starting to play with some visuals. And my hope is that by summer, I will have enough content populating that website that it can be public without looking too bare bones and too minimal.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And any of the visuals I think are really helpful. Not that we'll be able to have a in-person Buzz breakfast in June, but at some point I'm hoping we can get people back together. We've been doing them virtually. I don't know if either of you have been on the calls that we've had. We've had some really national level speakers talking about the monuments and reparations, and how do you create creative placemaking, and how do you really get the whole community involved with that. So they've been really good. The videos of the past ones are on our website. We've got Maria Jackson, professor at Arizona State University, sort of a leading expert in equitable creative placemaking. She's going to be talking next month, March 18th at 8:30. So to me, this would be a great, we have one planned in April that's going to be a panel of local people talking about what's the city and county doing so far. But to me, this would be a great follow-on to, okay, we talked about the Vance Monument and monuments in general and public art and how to make it equitable as a community, but then really getting into the reparations question. And look, here's how much wealth was lost in our African-American community, and those kind of things, or just even a glimpse of that kind of stuff would be a huge segue, and I think it fit perfectly. So if you guys are up for it, I'll start telling the planning team, look, I think I found our first panel. And if it's something where you both have enough information, we could maybe even split it into two. But right now, it sounds like you guys could tag team and keeps it fresh too.
Yeah. If I could ask quick favor of you, Ed, if you happen to see Jackie Hallam, I know you work with her somewhat through the Remembrance
Right.
work. If you could let her know, I sent her an email this morning. I'm curious. I'm interested in interviewing her for the oral history project. So
she'd be
if you happen
great.
to see her, just kind of.
Okay. All
Cool,
right.
thank
You'll
you.
probably see her before me. We have not been able to. We were supposed to co-chair the education department in that, and it's been difficult. But yeah, if I see her, I'll certainly mention it to her.
Cool. And I see
Great.
Marie just had to go, but Marie, I think, was asking on behalf of RJC if they could be involved in that too, Ed.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, well, I definitely want to get them involved in that. That'd be terrific.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys. This is terrific. Great work.
You're welcome. Thanks.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Thank you very much. This was very informative, and I actually work in admissions, but I think this is a great project to showcase for interested students and current students about the kind of work that they can get involved with. I think one of the great things about sharing about our campus is the kind of projects. Sorry, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but what they can be involved with in our local community. So I thank you for sharing about this very much.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I will be teaching, I'm pretty sure it's not confirmed yet, but I think I'll be teaching the Urban Renewal first year seminar again in spring of 2022. So if you talk to any first year, if this comes up at any point when you talk to like prospective students, feel free to mention that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I guess the reason why I asked my question is that I'm just very interested in how institutions showcase and broadcast intimate work, and specifically work that might be first might bring up like very difficult subjects like traumatic subjects, and just bringing in a museum lens into it. So thank you for also taking my question. I think I'll definitely think about that. I don't know if y'all are taking in volunteers, but I'm happy to help some way.
Especially since you're a member of the campus community and have access to the archives. I mean, once there's room in the schedule, Gene, I don't want to speak for you, but as far as I'm concerned, all hands on deck.
Yeah.
More people helping.
Yeah, we are, for COVID reasons and social distancing, we are limiting the number of people that can come into the archives at one time. And we have a couple of history researchers in a history class coming in, and we're the hours that we're there are pretty booked right now, but we know this will change. We know, and we also know that this is a long project, and there will be need for help for Kathleen's folks and Patrick's folks for some time now, because this is a big major project, two big major projects.
Excellent. Thank you. Count me in. I'm interested. Fully support your work. Thank you. I'll be keeping an eye out on updates about the project. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Adam.
Well, thanks everybody.